I just got a 1971 Mercury Marquis. It's a two-door. It's got a 429 with high compression, C6, and a 9-inch rear end. The body's in pretty decent shape on it. It definitely has some trim damage, but there's a stack of trim in the trunk. Didn't have a steering column. The interior is pretty shot. You know, some lights are broke, some are good. The glass and body are in pretty decent shape. But yeah, this is a huge car. I'm going to end up using this as a parts car for my 1970 Galaxy. Yeah, here's the 429. This engine compartment is pretty untouched in my opinion. It's got a lot of the factory stuff still on it. It's got the engine tag still on it. These are Dove C heads. So these are some of the better heads for higher compression. But a lot of parts I was missing from the Galaxy were like the drive shaft, higher compression heads, frame pads. I was missing some of the big block pulley system stuff for a car, especially the power steering setup. I'll be able to get a lot of other parts for this, like the brake stuff and suspension. And I basically got this for a little over $300, and then I had to pay $100 to have it towed. So I had $300 in barter. I was helping a friend sell cars, and every car I sold, I'd get $100. And then I also did a little bit of side work. So, but basically I had over $300 credit with them, and then they let me have the car, and then I paid $100 in towing. It didn't have any wheels and tires on it. These are the wheels and tires from my Galaxy on it right now that are just roller tires. But again, this is another one. It's kind of a shame to see it come apart. The body is hopefully going to go to a guy in Texas who has the exact same car, but his has a lot of rust and body rot issues. So this will help him get his car restored, and I'll be able to get all the mechanical pieces I need for the Galaxy. So it's a win-win. So then basically the goal with this right now is just, you know, remove the engine and transmission, all the suspension and rear end, all the brake stuff, and then it's just going to be sitting here as a body, and then hopefully the guy can come and pick it up. But this is a pretty badass looking car. I didn't know the Mercury Marquis went back this far, and this is actually a pretty good body style. I'm not a real big fan of the grills after 70 when they started getting a little weirder, but this one's tolerable for me. And but the whole side profile and the roof line just looks really good. And unfortunately, I can't fix them all. These parts are going to be able to make my Galaxy look really nice and complete with factory pieces. And then the rest of these body panels will go and be able to help that guy in Texas. And so this car is going to go and, you know, give life to 2 other cars. But yeah, this is just a 2-barrel. But as far as I know, it's, you know, as far as the long block, it's the same as the 4-barrel setups. So once you get this rebuilt and put a bigger intake, carburetor, better exhaust on it, just that alone, and you know, maybe even aftermarket cam, this engine's going to be pretty good. Unfortunately, when it was being stored, someone left the distributor out of it, so I went ahead and vacuumed it out so it wasn't, you know, encouraging more dirt in there. But that's what's making me think this whole engine's just going to have to come apart. When I get the engine apart, I'll see what the condition of everything is. But right now it turns over really good. All right, so right here we're just getting the hood off, having my dad help me. Just 4 bolts, and you know, it's always good to have some help with. Right here I'm getting the heater hoses off that runs down to the water pump and that go up to the plenum box. Working on the AC lines next. Have to get them off of the condenser for the AC system. So getting the lines off the condenser. Right there. Then just getting the lines off the plenum box for the AC. Got those disconnected, now I can get the condenser out basically. That's the power steering cooler that I just sat aside. Now I'm working on getting the fan out. That's just a little tedious. The power steering pump out, which this is one thing I really needed because I didn't have the car big block bracket for the power steering. Because the I believe the brackets are different between the trucks and the cars, and then between small block and big block they're different. Now I'm getting the AC pump out. You know, most of this stuff is pretty easy so far, just unbolting stuff. Now, right here I had to get the throttle cable off and probably undo the kick down to the transmission, and just undoing some ground wires. All right, well, I showed a time lapse of this coming apart. I went ahead and took the condenser out. The radiator was already taken out, and I was hoping for transmission lines for me, but they were already damaged. So I'm probably gonna make some for the Galaxy. I went ahead and, you know, cut all the lines, all the rubber hoses, heater hose, took all the clamps, took the AC lines off, took these pieces that went to the air cleaner off, removed a little bit of spark plug wires that were here. Then I removed all the pulley stuff, removed the fan off the water pump, then removed the idler pulleys, removed all the air conditioning pulley setup and the brackets. Then I went back there and I could have unplugged the wiring to the engine, but I went ahead and cut it just to go ahead and keep like a little longer length in the plug if I wanted. Then I disconnected the kick down and the throttle cable, disconnected the power steering pump and all that, and the power steering pump cooler. The next step is to take the transmission out. So I'm gonna go, I got it up on ramps right now. I'm gonna take the drive shaft out and start disconnecting any other little incidental things off the transmission. Then I can pull the transmission, and then I'll go ahead and pull the engine. Yeah, so I don't know how much of pulling the transmission I can show, but I'll try to get some time lapse. All right, right here I'm getting the exhaust off. That can be a pain a lot of times, but this came off pretty easy. Just 2 bolts on the exhaust manifold, and I pulled out the Y for the exhaust. This is a single exhaust car. I was gonna detach the muffler, but it was just being a pain, so just decided to cut it. Getting the transmission pan off so I could drain the fluid. I should have cracked a bolt a little different, but I got most of it in the pan, so not a big deal. But over the years, working with my dad, we've gained a habit of removing the transmission separately from the engine, so that's just what I'm doing today. So right there is the shifter, and the shifter is actually different between small block and big block cars. The shifter mechanism that goes between the steering column and the transmission, it bolts to the frame and the transmission. Now I'm getting the inspection plate off, and later this is where I will go in and remove the torque converter bolts. Now the transmission lines were already damaged in the front. I did try to remove them, but they were still being a pain because they're just, a lot of times they get seized over the years, so I just decided to cut them, especially because the front was already damaged. Then just feed those out, get them out of the way. Now I can remove the starter. Just got to take the cable off and then 2 bolts. So yeah, in the time lapse, I went ahead and got the exhaust off, disconnected the kick down from the bottom, disconnected the shifter linkage that was connected to the frame. I'm going to go ahead and keep all that connects to the frame. I took off the inspection plate on the transmission so I can get to the torque converter bolts. I removed the transmission lines. They were already damaged in the front and they were being a pain back here, so I went ahead and unbolted them. Or I went ahead and cut them so I could just get them out of the way. I removed the vacuum modulator, but it has a hard tube that I think goes up and connects to one of the bell housing bolts, so that won't really be in the way until later. Or that'll come apart. Got the dipstick tube out, which is important. I needed that for the Galaxy. That was one thing I was really missing. And now I'm going to go ahead and just crank the engine over by hand so I can get access to all 4 of the torque converter bolts through the inspection plate. And then so when I take out the transmission, I'll take out transmission and torque converter at one time. All right, getting the cross member out. So taking the 2 bolts out that go to the transmission mount right there, so I can push the transmission off of the cross member using just a basic transmission jack that's strapped in really good. I'm going to go ahead and take the bolts out on the end of the cross member and jack it up and get it out. Now I'm working at getting the bell housing bolts out. That's the main thing that holds the transmission to the engine. And I just got these new impact tools and extension sets, so you see me taking advantage of that a lot in this video. Now after getting the bell housing bolts out, that was pretty much the last of it. But there's a mid plate in here that still had a bolt attached, so it took me a second to find that. Then I got that removed and we were good to go. Got it out. Got the transmission out. It's a greasy mess, but got it out in one piece. At the end there, I was getting a little hung up, and I'm used to doing the small block transmissions where the mid plate is only held on by the dowel pins, where this is bolted on. So one of the bolts was still holding it on. I thought it wasn't going to be a problem, but it ended up being one. But I got that off okay. I got the engine mount bolts out. Just a long bolt with a nut on it. I was going to leave them in, just take the nut off and leave the bolt in for a bit, but I took it off and they were completely loose on both sides, so I decided to take it out before I lowered it. I have this adjustable engine puller set right here that I just got. Yeah, I just connected in 4 points on the intake manifold. So pulling the engine out now, it's a piece of cake with the transmission disconnected. Can just get it out no problem. Now I'll go ahead and remove the flex plate, remove the block separator plate or mid plate, and then I'll go ahead and install the piece for the engine stand so it can go on there. All right, well I got the motor and transmission out without too much problem. And here's the transmission down here. Both of these will probably get rebuilt and used for the Galaxy, but that's like at a way later date. I do want to measure the overall length of this transmission and compare it to the truck transmission that's in the Galaxy right now. I'm going to go ahead and pull the brake booster and a couple little incidentals, but the next 2 main things are the rear end and all the front end and suspension. But I'm probably going to pull the rear end first because I can do most of it will be kind of underneath, where a good chunk of the front end can be done from the side. So I'm going to go ahead and do the rear end first, and then I'll do the front end. All right, so I got the car jacked up and on jack stands in the rear and getting the wheels off right now. Then I'll go ahead and remove the shocks because the shocks are kind of is going to limit how far the rear end can go down. So I'll go ahead and get the shocks out, and then I can lower it even further. Then get the springs out. Now I'll get the panhard bar out and remove all the lines, emergency brake lines, brake lines. And again, probably not the best decision, but I went ahead and just cut the line instead of dealing with a seized brake line for hours trying to get it apart. And the emergency brake gave me some trouble, but I was able to get that out without a problem. Then I'll remove the emergency brake cables to each drum. And I'll go ahead and get the trailing arms out. And once all that's disconnected, jack it up, remove the jacks, and get it out. All right, well, I got the rear end out yesterday. Basically took me about a couple hours. Then I went ahead and threw the front on jack stands last night and got the wheels off, so I was ready to start stripping the front end today. Here's the rear end in all its glory. Still got to get those trailing arms off. Doesn't appear to be nodule, because I think it's supposed to have an N on the front. But that looks like a 9-inch for sure. Looked a little bigger underneath the car for some reason. I'm just gonna go ahead and strip all the steering and suspension out of it. Just gotta be careful with the spring. When I loosen the spindle, I need to have support on it and for when it comes down, so it doesn't just pop out. Yeah, I'll probably leave the disc brakes on the spindle. And I'll go ahead and just remove the caliper, then remove like the tie rod end, then the sway bar. Then I'll just remove everything from the lower control arm. Then I'll remove the spindle, release the pressure, make sure take the shock out, and then I can remove the control arms, and then I'll go in there and get the rest of the idler arm off of the frame and get the steering gearbox out. And I do that on both sides, and should be pretty good. All right, so sorry this isn't the best angle, but right there I'm getting the brake lines off on both sides. Then removing cotter pins from the bolts. Gonna go ahead and remove the tie rod end with a ball joint tool. Those things work really good. Removing the strut rod right there. Now I'm getting ready to unbolt the spindle, so I'm just taking the pressure off of it. And I already got the spindle bolts out, and now I'm just separating it with a pickle fork. That didn't really work well, so I used the ball joint tool. And there we go, got the spring out. Now I can take the lower control arm out and the upper control arm, and that's pretty much the whole front end right there. All right, I got the front end all removed, and I did a time lapse of this side. The other side is basically identical. The only thing I really didn't get, the pitman arm was bolted up on this side, and then the steering gearbox was bolted up on this side with bolts that were on the outside of the frame, so I had to take out the 3 bolts, and it dropped that whole steering gearbox assembly with the pitman and idler arm and the tie rods and everything. Got all the main stuff. I'm just getting little incidentals now. I'm going to go ahead and take the frame pads right here. I'm going to get the battery tray. Go ahead and get the brake booster, probably. And I think that's about it. There might be a couple little odds and ends of things, but once that's done, hopefully this guy in Texas will come pick this up, and we'll be good to go. And then I'll have tons of parts for the Galaxy. I'm about to tear down this 1971 429 Ford Big Block and check out the condition of it. A lot of this is going to be just time lapse of me taking it apart, and then once we get to a part where I can talk about like the condition of items. Mostly I'm concerned about the cylinder heads and the block. Once I know those, then we'll look at them and talk about it some more. But roughly I'm just gonna, strip the whole thing, take the exhaust manifold off, take carburetor, intake manifold, water pump, timing cover, take the crank pulley off, fuel pump, all the little incidentals, thermostat housing, valve covers, then get the cylinder heads off, and then take apart the inside. Where I need to store this is kind of far away from the garage, and it's easier for me to move everything in pieces. And there was some concern with the motor with the distributor being open and a spark plug being out, so dirt definitely got in this motor. How much? I don't know. I don't know if water got into this motor either. We have sandstorms out here pretty bad, so even with the hood closed, dirt can get into really bad spots. But the engine turns over good, almost too good. But that might be the lack of compression in the one cylinder without the spark plug. But I don't feel like the cylinder's rusted at all, but I definitely don't want to run it with a chance of sand inside. No matter what, it needs to come apart. So I'm just going to take it apart, get all the parts that I need for the future engine rebuild for the Galaxy, and then store the stuff in a really good spot. But I'm excited for the crank and the block, so I can have the older style without the counterbalance up front on the crank. And then I'm really interested in the cylinder heads. Cylinder heads are number one. So far I have the intake manifold and the cylinder heads off. I tried to get a time lapse of it coming off, but it didn't record right. I was gonna save the rockers and the push rods initially and the head bolts, but I can get all that stuff brand new, like roller rockers, new push rods, head studs for a few $100s. Probably just gonna go that route. So far, the cylinders look good. This is probably the worst cylinder with just a little bit of surface rust right in here. And that was the one that didn't have the spark plug in it. All the other cylinders are no rust and perfectly smooth. They do all have a little bit of a ridge right at the top. Nothing crazy. This block's more than usable. Like, it could probably be honed out a little bit and used, but probably going to just go ahead and rebuild it eventually. So I'll have the block and heads to rebuild. And the cylinder heads are pretty good too. None of the valves are messed up. Nothing really looks abnormal. The only thing I saw is every few valves has some heavy wear on the edge of the stem. Like, yeah, this one especially, there's like a dent in it. You know, that makes me believe I should replace the valves if they're starting to wear pretty bad like that. If I'm gonna replace a valve, might as well just rebuild it. Then if I'm gonna go that route, I might as well talk to a machinist and question the fact that if these need hardened seats or not. You know, probably just go the route of rebuilding everything and just do it up correctly. I have the other 460 in the car that runs right now. I just mostly need the oil pan and the motor mounts and stuff like that to get it to fit right. These parts will go on like the shelf for in the future. Yeah, here's the other side too. Again, a little bit of a ream. You know, real smooth inside. Yeah, I just need to, I'm gonna finish taking this apart, take off the timing cover, water pump, crank pulley, rip off the oil pan, and I'm not 100% sure if I'm gonna go ahead and rip out the crank and the pistons, but it would make it a little lighter to move this around. I pretty much got it all apart. Just got to get the crank and the camshaft out. I ran into a little problem with the timing cover. It had a bolt broke off in it, and that bolt threaded all the way through into the block. What I ended up having to do was prying it up just slightly, and I got a hacksaw blade in between there and cut the bolt off. That was the best I could do. I tried drilling the cover out with the bolt, but I ended up drilling it a little crooked. So might need a new timing cover, but I actually have a couple just laying around. But I'm not sure if it threads into that timing cover or not. I'm gonna check that out, but it was super seized onto that and onto the engine. So I'm gonna work with trying to get the broken bolt out of there now. I'm gonna try that technique where you weld a nut on the end and try to get it out. If that doesn't work, then probably just let the machine shop deal with it. I mean, worst case, I could always drill it out and put in a helicoil right there. The oil pan had some water in it. And I thought at first that the filter had metal in it, but this is like some sort of plastic. I'm not really sure where the plastic would be coming from, but my dad said that they used to put additives in the oil for like someone who had bad compression, and that it would throw plastic in your engine like that. And what's interesting is he said that before I told him that there was one of the pistons has a broken ring. Definitely had bad compression probably on a cylinder. It didn't damage the cylinder wall at all. So I'm not really sure what's up with the water. Looks like it was mixed into the oil pretty good. When I dumped the oil filter, the oil came out perfectly clean. So it almost makes it seem like water was just accumulating in the bottom of the engine somehow. I was hoping for something I could just re-ring and put back together, but the crank is all chewed up, eaten up pretty bad everywhere. You know, it had the water in it. It's gonna need a little bit of machine work, or hopefully I can, you know, get that bolt out myself. And with the water, I'm a little concerned that the block might be cracked or something. But again, if it was running water in it enough to get into the oil pan, it should have been milkiness in the filter too, which I didn't really see. And here's the piston that had the broken ring. You can see the very top ring, there's just like half a ring there. And I guess it just cracked and stayed in place because nothing really looks damaged. So, although it's broken in a couple spots right there, but you know, it's still in there. So like I said, the part I wanted the most was the cylinder heads. I could always slap those on the 79 engine and boost the compression a little bit, which might be a thought if this engine's gonna be a little more of a pain in the ass than I thought. Like if it goes to the machine shop and has a bad bill of health, then I'll probably just go ahead and rebuild those and put them on the other engine. Otherwise, if it's good, I'll just rebuild everything and put it together as one and swap it over. This oil pan was important too, because the Galaxy has a truck motor in it, and I had a long time ago cut the oil pan and MIG welded it together to fit the car. And at the time, this was like 10, 12 years ago. At the time, I don't think they were making reproduction full-size Ford oil pans, and I was having trouble finding one. Now they make them for like 60, 70 bucks, but I know a lot of people are complaining about maybe some of the flimsiness in it, so this is gonna be really good having a stock one. But my pan doesn't really leak, but it's like wet, so it's leaking a little bit, but not enough to really cause a problem. But so that'd be good to get this one on there. All right, so we had looked at a ton of different options on the best way to load this on the trailer for the shipper, and it ended up being a crane was the best option. And I knew a guy that had a crane, so I gave him a call, and it was no problem. He did it effortlessly. We just put some 4x4s underneath it, and he strapped to it. Then the shipper from Texas basically showed up right on time. We got it loaded up, and this really was the best option because that body was really straight, and we got it loaded with zero issue. And doing the whole crane thing was pretty fun. Never got to experience anything like that. Now that's off to its home in Texas. All right, thanks for watching. You guys take it easy. If you have any questions, comment below. Visit the website. I should have a contact there, phone number where you can call or text, email, whatever. All right, take it easy. Bye. Again, thanks for watching. I got tons of stuff on the website, desertratracer.com. Again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. And, maybe check out some other videos and go ahead and subscribe if you want.